Thank you all for being here. Everybody here knew my mother in one capacity or another, or if not directly through me. I really, I call this a memorial, but it's really a celebration of her life. She lived a long life. She was 92 years old when she passed away, and she was basically incapacitated. Can you not hear me? Okay. And in a way, it was a blessing when she passed away. She passed away peacefully in her sleep. Her family was around her, and I think she knew that, and it was a mix of emotions for me. I mean, I miss her, and you know, it's hard to let go, but at the same time, I know that it was her time, and she was suffering, and it was a blessing. And her life was a blessing in a lot of ways. And what I want to do tonight is talk a little bit about her and where she came from. And she was a prolific writer. And interestingly, I just went through, I found the box that we had brought back from Florida when she had moved up here in 2006 that I had never looked through. There were so many belongings. There were boxes I never unpacked, and I wanted to find some writings to read tonight, and I found just a treasure trove of her writings that I had no idea that she had written so much, and the depth of her writing was very impressive to me. I don't know if it will be to everybody else, but I think that to a measure it probably will be. She lived through an era. That generation was disappearing. You know, the people who she was the child of an immigrant who came over here. Her parents came over, refugees from wars and oppression, and they lived through the Great Depression, and then they lived through World War II, and they saw so much change in the American landscape and the change of the world. I mean, there were horses and buggies on the streets of New York City when my mother was born, you know. And she saw everything change from that and into the space age and the computer age. And all that knowledge, even now, you know, when my father died in 1989, even today, I think frequently I wonder about this relative or that relative or what something was like at one point. Well, I'll ask my dad, oh, I forgot he's not there anymore, you know. And the same thing about my mom now, you know. I want to ask about our history, and it's not there anymore. But she left behind this treasure trove of writings that I've discovered that really do provide an insight into those times and what life was like in the 1920s, 1930s on up, and insights into reactions of things that happened in my life when Zev and Marima were born. You know, they didn't really communicate to me about that so much, but she wrote it down. And it's so interesting to read those insights now that I'm an elderly person of sorts, to see the difference in the way I think about things now in common with her, as opposed to how I did then. So many emotions. So she was really a remarkable woman. When she was being raised in the South Bronx, women didn't commonly strive for a higher education. They strove to get married to somebody with a higher education, you know. But it was there was something in my mother's makeup that made her want to gain an education. And she tried to. She worked and went to school. She went to Sarah Lawrence University, and then she went to Hunter College. But they needed her at home to work, and so she had to quit school and work to help support the family. And then when she got married, she married my father, who owned a small butcher shop. Not when they got married, after they borrowed money so that he could open a butcher shop, a small little shop in the Bronx. She did the bookkeeping for him, and she became a bookkeeper for other businesses as well. I remember her walking miles to go and work at a place once we had moved to Queens in New York. And while she was working, while she was being a mother, she would take night school classes to finish her college education. And she graduated when she was nearly 50 years old from college, and got a job in the New York City school system as a high school English teacher in an inner city high school, Long Island City High School, in a rough neighborhood. And she used to take a bus and a subway to get there every morning, and then walk through this rough neighborhood to go to school. And she loved it, and they loved her too. She was a good teacher, and she taught for the next 20 years or so, when she and my father retired to Florida. And all the time she would write. I remember my remembrances of her, she never seemed to be sleeping. She was always, when I went to bed, she was up, grading papers, write, and then she'd stay up beyond that and write. Just write for pleasure, I guess, and write to chronicle. It was like a catharsis for her, I think, to write these things down. And she published that book when she was in her 80s. Tushika, it's a story, it's an autobiographical novel. She doesn't use real names in it, but it's about her and her family. Just there are some things over on that table that give a flavor of the things she liked. That Bruegel painting was her favorite painting. She kept that in her living room. She loved music, classical music, Yiddish music, and klezmer music. And she always she wanted her children to get an education and succeed as well. And I think I was a disappointment to her in some ways, because I never finished my college education. I didn't have the same striving that she did, or it was during an era when I was going to school in the Vietnam War that I was distracted by other things. And I think she understood that, but at the same time, she was always asking me to go back to school. Always. What I'd like to do is tonight is read some of her poetry, but maybe interspersed with things that other people might have to say about their experiences. Is there anybody else who would like to say something about what they remember about her mother? I don't want to pressure anybody to do that.
It might spontaneously arise, right?
Pardon?
It might spontaneously arise.
Sure. Sure. Well, I'll start by reading something that my sister wrote and sent to me and asked if I would read. So I'll start with that. My mother asked me what I would say about her after she was gone. She was concerned about the distance between us. Did I understand her? She taught me, reading is good. I remember my mother walking me to an auspicious library in the Bronx for my first library card. We had no decor in our Bronx apartment, but we had books. I learned to love books. Writing is good. She wrote me letters when I went away to camp. She wrote poetry, essays, papers, and one book. Writing was both creative and therapeutic. I learned to write. Chocolate is good. Herring and halva are soul foods. A little lox is good too. Whole wheat is for health nuts. I learned to enjoy chocolate and herring and halva and lox. Sorry, Mom, whole wheat is our norm now. Complaining is good. It means that you are alive. Walmart, regardless of its corporate policies or environmental impact, is for indoor walking. Its large spaces are flat, cool in summer, and warm in winter. I learned to walk, although I stick to our gentle neighborhood hills since Walmart hasn't infiltrated our country. Music and dancing are good. I learned to love them too. Men are essential to women, and women are competition among themselves for men. Well, sort of. Beautiful people get more benefits in life. She pronounced people either beautiful or not when she met them, and either envied or pitied them after that. New clothes lift your spirit, even if they are new only to you. They lift the spirit even higher if you bought them in a thrift shop at a fabulous price in Palm Beach. Honesty was important if she was speaking, and discretion was important if you were speaking to her. Elderly was a dirty word. My mother's story began with her father, who was an identical twin. In his small village in Romania, twins were a burden on family survival and a shame, I was told. An unmarried cousin, admittedly of some notoriety, was called in to help, and the twins survived. The twins and this cousin emigrated to America. My great-uncle lived his life. My grandfather lived his life in debt to this woman. She collected her indebtedness by moving in and out of my parents' household. She drank, she smoked, she had affairs. She was your antithetical Jewish woman, unlike my grandma Sarah, who was a traditional type. The tensions, battles between these two women were my mother's home environment. I remember them myself in my early years. In trying to understand herself and explain herself, she wrote poems, essays, and a book. The story of her youth burned in her, and she worked on it for 30 years. I have put it out tonight among the photos. Oh, okay, this is a separate memorial that my sister held. My mother did better than survive. She won a full scholarship in Sarah Lawrence College in 1938, but her family needed her to work during the Depression and further expected that a marriage and husband would suffice, while available resources would go to her brother, not such a good student, as a man who would have to support a family. My mother was determined to get the education to which she felt she was entitled. She took a few night courses and then day classes, beginning when she was 40. She earned a master's degree while teaching high school English. It can be no accident that she was a role model for me when I returned to school to earn a doctorate. I could do it. My mother was social. She had lifelong friends who came over on Saturday nights or to whose homes she and my father went. Times were different. Almost everyone we knew lived in New York City, and dropping in on people was the norm. We dropped in, they dropped in, and there was always tea, coffee, cold cuts, rye bread, cake, and chocolate. My mother was socially conscious. We went on peace marches, civil rights marches, and union lines together. She wrote letters and made phone calls. She helped to organize the PTA and local political processes. She and my father played the music of Woody Guthrie, Paul Robeson, and Pete Seeger, and supported his TV music hour once his blacklisting was lifted. She helped friends, a childless couple in Century Village, for example, manage their papers and finances beneficially when they had no one else. My mother loved theater and introduced me to the wonders of Broadway from an early age. Her granddaughter Naomi is a costume designer and an equal love with an equal love of theater. Her other grandkids enjoy being in the audience. My mother managed the family finances and was generous to help us for help with the children's college education and their weddings. These years since my mother's stroke in 2005 have been hard for her. She felt her waning abilities, but resisted help and growing old. She became frightened of being alone. My brother took her into his life in North Carolina. He is strong, compassionate, and his circumstances allowed for her to live with him for a year and a half, and then to oversee the series of institutions in which she lived. I hadn't read this before. So. People would ask me how she was doing, and I would say the same, only a little worse. Hers was a slow and sad decline and death. My mother asked me what I would say after she was gone. She was aware that her mothering was difficult, a result of conflict in her own youth. There were difficulties, but I came to understand most of those, to respect the strengths and values that she had been able to pass on despite it all. May she rest in peace. Anybody? So this is a poem that she called Biography. It's more like a haiku poem. Childhood, no Romanian Rhapsody. Adolescence, Great Depression. Stop dreaming, budding scholar. Go out and earn $1. War, Holocaust, Hiroshima. Peace, marriage, family. Little time for poetry. Children grow. Children grow. Stirrings glow. Back to school you go. Born again at 50, earn a degree. Become a teacher of prose and poetry. From Mamaliga, Patlagela, and Vinu, opportunity and desire, a restless inner fire. In maturity, an American Rhapsody. It all comes together in a crescendo, a new beginning, not an endo. And that sense of humor was always a part of my mother. Even in the hardest of times, and even to the very end, you know, when most of her mind was not there, she maintained a sense of humor. And I told the story in Florida as well. But the last thing I heard from her, you know, I would go and visit her in the nursing home at Pisgah Manor. Sometimes she wouldn't say a word to me the whole time I was there, and I don't know, she was angry at me or she just wasn't capable of saying anything. And other times I would go and she would be in a better mood and would be speaking, and we'd have some conversation. Wasn't very much, but when I broke my leg, I couldn't go and visit her for a number of weeks, you know, and between October and most of October and November, and it concerned me. I knew that she didn't understand why I wasn't coming to visit her, and I finally made the effort when I could to go and see. And I came in on 2 crutches, you know, and I sat down and I explained to her, "Mom, I haven't been here to visit you because I broke my leg. I haven't been capable of coming." And she didn't say anything to me the whole time I was there. And then it came time for me to leave, and I thought she wasn't going to say anything. And then all of a sudden, as I was leaving the room, she shouted out, "Don't break the other leg." That was the last thing I heard my mother say. And as my sister mentioned, my mother always had a social consciousness. She taught us, and my father to read newspapers, and to not just be a bystander, but to participate in the political process. They always voted. And when we sat down for dinner, the conversation was a political conversation. We'd talk about what was happening today, what the reactions were of, Republicans, Democrats. I mean, they were Democrats and they were labor activists, but they were always open-minded. They were never rhetorical in their beliefs. They were never hard-line anything. They just discussed and ruminated, and we were forced to be part of that conversation. And we did. We went to demonstrations. We went to the United Nations. I remember a demonstration put on by SANE, which was this nuclear disarmament group in New York, in the world. And we would holding picket signs and walking up and down, and they would never cross a picket line, a labor line. And my father developed a very strong environmental consciousness and consciousness about foods, organic foods, and even though he ran a butcher shop, he developed a very powerful knowledge about nutritional needs, and he actually went to chiropractic school for a year in the evening after he came home from work, and he couldn't maintain that for more than a year, but that became part of the conversation too. And, so this is a poem that my mother wrote right after Chernobyl took place. It's called "Meltdown in the Ukraine, Man's World." Smoke streaks launch a black cloud which floats ominously west. Stockholm perceives with alarm, measures radioactivity. How much harm? Europe watches fearfully, checks crops and cows' milk. Kiev is bereaved. No one knows to what extent, nor how the truth is shifted bent. Seeds of destruction carried by air settle on the soil will impair. Bones, tissues, genes, who will sing the dirge for the mutations, the anguish of the now and future generations? In Moscow on May Day, Muscovites march. The media mutes anxiety, playing down the catastrophe in unison, proclaiming solidarity. 3 Mile Island, Pennsylvania, Indian Point, New York, St. Lucie, Florida, Oak Ridge, Tennessee, Love Canal. It's all so banal. When oil is short, how we will long for nuclear superiority, so says William Buckley, representing the vocal minority. Silent, silent is the silent majority. We don't appreciate, we don't deserve progress. And a little footnote about Chernobyl is that is where my father's family comes from the city of Chernobyl.
your mother very often. When she was living with you on the hill there, every time I would come, she always remembered me and had kind words, asked me about my children, asked me about my dog, and made usually a joke and always had a smile. And maybe a month or year or 2 weeks or 3 weeks would go by, if I went over to visit, she always remembered me and called me by my name. Thank you.
Thank you, John.
Speaking of names, she's how I found out that he's not Avram, but he's Bruce. I never heard her call you Avram.
Well, Avram is my middle name.
Yeah.
The name that she gave me. Yeah, when I chose to move over to Avram, she didn't move with me. So,
I just wanted to say something. I started working with Gertrude when she moved to Avram, so shortly afterwards, and I really enjoyed her. We had a good time. We went out in the community, and I guess the first week I read her poetry, and she loved it. She kept getting poetry out for me, and I really appreciated it. She was really grateful for the appreciation. But I do remember her sense of humor, and I stopped trying to feed her health food all the time. I started wanting to make her happy, you know, because I figured she's going to eat what she's going to eat anyway, you know. So, but yeah, I remember even at her advanced age, she was willing to go over to the Seventh-day Adventist program in Tennessee, or to learn about other ways of eating, and she couldn't.
Barbara went over there with her.
Right, she couldn't keep with the program, but it was amazing to me that she was willing to even go and try at that age, and so anyway.
That was radically different diet for her, because they were vegans. That's right. There was no milk or dairy products or eggs or
sugar. That's the big one for her.
No sugar.
Come on, let's be real
right.
here.
Yeah.
Chocolate went out the window for a couple of weeks.
Yeah. You know. Yeah. It's hard to argue with somebody who lived 92 years.
I have a lot of fond memories.
Yeah. And Ellen took care of her a lot.
I remember when we went to the Seventh-day Adventist, and she was the star there, you know. She was obviously the oldest person, but she made sure everybody knew she was Jewish, and she had a great sense of humor. Everybody wanted to talk to her. I think we had to get a reservation. What I remember the most is her sense of humor, her incredible memory, and her stamina. She always wanted to go out to lunch quite a bit. Her hair done and her nails. I was just amazed that she wanted to do it. We would call, what was the bakery then?
Annie's Bakery?
Annie's Bakery would call whenever I was there and see what kind of soup they had. She wanted just soup. But her memory was just blew me away. That's the biggest thing I remember. I used to watch some old movies on Turner Broadcast Station. She knew every actor, every actress, what the whole movie was about. You know, there's movies I had never seen, but she knew. Amazing. She would tell me about her family, and she said every family had some crazy people in it. She loved her children, her grandchildren. She was so proud and told everybody she had great grandchildren, and very proud of them. She was just a lovely woman, a real lady.
Thank you for the part you took in being with her. Wonderful. So this is a poem. This is, I think my mother was about 80 years old, maybe 82 or 3, when she got her first computer. It wasn't really a computer, it was a word processor. But it had some other capabilities. You know what the first computers were like. They're primitive compared to what we have now. But nonetheless, it was a big adaptation for her to go from a typewriter, which she had used all her life, to a computer. And she was just learning how to use it when she wrote this poem from the perspective of the computer. Hello, I'm Composito Computer, sometimes known as the Great Disputer. Now living at the above address with a lady who occasionally gives me some distress. She bangs on my keyboard as if I'm a typewriter. God, when she bought me, I thought she was brighter. But I take no nonsense. When she offers abuse, I get on my screen and often refuse to do what she wants. I get defiant and tell her, you've made an error, and let her know I'm self-reliant. Sometimes she hits me right in the belly. I let her know I'm not made out of jelly. You've used up your space, I reply. When she wants to elongate, or some other chazarai. That's a Yiddish term, chazarai, which maybe I can get some help from Bob Gurovich. Junk. Nonsense, right? No real literal translation, but chazarai. So far, I write letters and print them quite well if she follows instructions and doesn't rebel. She wants to delete and omit and erase. These hijinks are undignified. They're a disgrace. I wish she'd make up her mind from the start. If she gives me more trouble, we'll just have to part. She thinks she'll master me. Ha! I'll show her who's boss. I'll tease her and trip her and throw her for a loss. Does she think I'll reveal my secrets so fast? I'm no easy mark. Let's see who'll outlast. Well, folks, you've heard of the war of the sexes. This one's on me, the war of the nexus. I'll keep in touch and let you know how much progress we're making and how long it's taking and who'll master who. Meanwhile, make with a smile, for I'm looking forward to meeting you. This was actually in a letter to her grandchildren, my sister's children. I've heard about Sharon, I've heard about Ari, I've heard of Naomi too. I know that you've been to Lion Safari and to the Dreyer Park Zoo. There are many more places to see once you come down to Berkshire Sea. That was her address in Florida. Hope there'll be sunshine and warmth so you can swim and follow your every wish and whim. I'm eagerly awaiting someone who knows how to manage whatever I can do. Perhaps your dad can manage me more graciously than she. I really do look forward to meeting you. We can play games, and you can call me Compy the Pooh. Just don't poo-poo the things I can do.
Published in a book. You should get these poems published in a book.
Yeah, maybe. Many of them actually have been published in various magazines, local magazines, and some she had frequently some of her poetry and prose were published in a magazine called Jewish Currents, which is a nationwide Jewish magazine that in some circles is well read. And she also, there was a story about her in Real Simple magazine over there, and she had things published in the Palm Beach Post and many places, really. So this is a poem that she wrote when the space shuttle Challenger exploded over Florida. 7 brave souls with stars in their eyes, soaring into space, new realms to realize. The dream, the melting pot, headed for the skies, blast off into a ball of fire before a billion eyes. Icarus melted gently as he mythologically flew toward the sun, only his anguished father viewing his descent, his hopes undone. The astronauts, as if to echo the futility of reaching for man's highest aspirations, blew up before a world that lacked humility. Together, 2 women, one a teacher, the other an engineer, a Christian and a Jew, one Japanese American, one black, and 3 Caucasians classified as white. 7 representatives of these United States perished in a puff of flame in a space flight. 7 brave souls with stars in their eyes, with one dream in common that did not materialize. Martyrs to exploration, symbols of unity, spirits soaring way above us materially, not without impunity, with so much to teach the human race. Well, the only thing that I have left to read, and I'm not sure that you'll want me to, because it's a short story she wrote. It's not quite as long as it looks. It's double-spaced, but it would take, I don't know, maybe half an hour or less to read, but I don't want to keep people captive. It was.
Can't you read excerpts?
She says, can you read excerpts?
Well, what I can do is I can start to read it, and what I have done is I've scanned it, and I can put it on the internet for, or you can write me and I can send you a copy of it if you want to hear it finished. So how about that? I mean,
Sounds like a good idea.
yeah.
And when you scan Chernobyl, what about the Challenger?
Oh, okay. Well,
Oh,
I'd be happy. But this is a very, for me, when I just found this like 2 days ago, or 3 days ago, when I was looking through her books, and I had no idea she had written it. But this gives a tremendous insight into what her childhood was like growing up in the South Bronx. This was written when about when she was 6 years old, and it's about her first day in school.
Oliver, before you get started, we can't stay.
Okay.
Gwen wants to be.
Oh,
We've got to get her back to the university, frankly.
Yeah, bye, Glenn. Bye, Roy.
Bye, Roy. Thank you for coming. Yeah. So, I'm going to sit down and start reading
Rest your leg.
this. And I'm going to drink a glass of wine.
Loosen up the vocal cords.
And I will not be offended if anybody decides they need to stand up and walk out as I'm reading this. Okay. It's entitled "Better Dead Than Stupid." Better dead than stupid. My first day in school, a favorite topic for school composition. How many of us remember that day? I will never forget it, or the days that immediately followed. for I learned a few lessons never intended in the official syllabus, which affected my entire life. I remember looking forward to that day when I would join the ranks of the elect, when I would reach the age of privilege, 6. My eagerness had been whetted by my mother, who had mixed motives. First, there was a grandmother who lived with us, my father's mother, who spoiled me terribly, constantly defying my mother's rules and bribing me with sweets and toys. And Mama wanted to get me as far away from her indulgences as possible. Then there was the big business venture my parents were planning. My father was going to leave his job with the transit authority, where he worked as a repairman at the trolley shops on the night shift for $21 a week. And he and Mama were going to open up a little candy store to entice other people's children with sweets. They could do that only after I was safely ensconced in school for most of the day. Mama had been preparing me for this great adventure, this wonderful opportunity, for as long as my childish memory recalled. Every night she crooned a lullaby that went something like this: "Go to sleep, my child, get a good night's sleep. Tomorrow you'll wake up a day older, and soon you'll go to school. You'll learn. You'll grow up to be something, a teacher, a lawyer, maybe a doctor. In America, everything is possible." Night after night, the same words, the same melody. It didn't rhyme, the meter was uneven, but the message was inspirational, and I couldn't wait for the miracle to happen. But the reality was different from what I expected. When the important first day of school arrived in September 1926, Mama dressed me in the brand new school clothes and handed me a little green and red plaid canvas school bag with a red leather handle. There was a proud, purposeful look on her face, and holding my hand, she guided me to that place of promise, that open sesame of which she had so often spoken, and my little heart beat in anticipation of that exciting world of learning and accomplishment into which I was about to be initiated. I don't know what I expected, but it was not the bedlam that greeted us on our arrival at the schoolyard. My first impression was overwhelming, my senses assaulted by the cacophony of screaming children, a multitude of boys and girls encased in riotously colored hats, jackets, gloves, a melange of bright reds and blues and greens and browns and grays, pushed and pulled, herded by frantic, overbearing women into orderly lines. One of these, tall and strange-looking, emerged from the chaos and swooped down to part me from my mother and herd me with the others through the door leading to what suddenly seemed mysterious and frightening. Into what cavern were those children disappearing, where all that noise was suddenly swallowed up? I was not ready to let go, to be led into that great unknown. Mama, seeing my bewilderment and sensing my panic, explained that I was shy and nervous. Could she escort me to my classroom? That wasn't a good idea, the lady said. No parents should go upstairs. That was not the right way to introduce a child to independence. See, she said, smiling, all the children are going up. Don't you want to be a big girl too? She extended her hand, but I shrank from her and clutched my mother's coat. Mama looked pleadingly at the woman. Please, she begged, just this one time until she sees there's nothing to be afraid of. Well, and with a shrug and a half nod of consent, she permitted Mama to take me upstairs to the 4th floor, to the classroom to which I had been assigned, after the yard was cleared of all the children. By the time we reached the classroom, the stairs were steep and many. Some of the children were already seated, and others were standing in a line around the back of the room, awaiting the teacher's instructions. She was standing in front of the room, using a ruler as a pointer, directing the pupils to various seats in the room. My heart sank when I saw the granite expression on her face. In retrospect, she was a middle-aged woman with tightly drawn, gray-flecked hair knotted into a bun, tense and glaring. Her poon myopic eyes, greatly magnified by the horn-rimmed spectacles perched on her nose, a veritable gargoyle of a woman. To this 6-year-old, she was totally forbidding in presence and personality. She looked sharply at us as we made our entrance, and when my mother started to explain our tardiness, she pursed her lips impatiently, gave me a sharp look, and waved me into a place on the line. Mama patted me reassuringly, kissed me hurriedly, and closed the door behind her. I looked around and quickly became absorbed in the tall windows, the colorful pictures, the blackboard. I could not look at the teacher for some reason and quickly looked away. Pupils were moving forward and talking and taking seats as she called their names. Someone kicked me. I turned to see who it was, but I wasn't fast enough. I looked questioningly at the boy in back of me, but he was looking somewhere else. I heard what seemed to be a short bark, but paid no attention as I searched for my molester. Again the bark. "You, pay attention! What's your name?" I looked to see whom she was addressing, and her fingers were pointing at me. Flustered and self-conscious, I blushed, couldn't find my voice. She addressed me again. Again, I couldn't answer. My blushes seemed to reflect on her, for her face was getting redder and redder, and her eyes larger and larger. The veins on her neck bulged. The magnifying glasses, like two headlights, beamed on me. Her body leaned forward threateningly. I was terrified. What did she want? "Your name," she was screeching. The kid in back pushed me forward. "What's your name, stupid?" I found my voice and whispered to him, "Gitla." "What are you whispering about?" she furiously demanded. "Answer me when I ask you something." "I know verstehe what you want." Verstehe is understand in Yiddish. In my mother's household, they spoke broken English. They didn't, and it was partially Yiddish, partially English. Her fury mounted astronomically. "What are you saying? I can't make you out at all." And in pronounced disgust, she strode over, dragged me to a seat, and plunked me down painfully. I was mortified. The hushed laughter of some of the children added to my humiliation. I became dimly aware of a lesson in progress, the teacher writing on the board, pointing to the symbols with her long ruler, and children chanting in unison with Miss Brick. Yes, that was her name, Miss Brick. As brittle as mortar and as insensitive, totally unaware that although I was born in America, I had been nurtured by immigrants and spoke a broken English. That I was painfully shy, had had very little contact with children of my own age, and was scared stiff of strangers. How I quavered, and she rapped the ruler on the desk as she used it to point to a pupil. And finally, as she actually rapped one child across the knuckles when he failed to reproduce the exact symbol on the board. He was a big, heavy boy. If she could make him wince, what could she do to me? What a disappointment school was. Not at all as I had anticipated, not the new wondrous world that had been held up to me. Where was the instant knowledge, the illumination, the feeling of maturity I thought it would bring? When my mother came to pick me up at noon and asked expectantly how I liked it, I couldn't find the words to express my confused reaction, and to my surprise, I found myself say, after a little hesitation, "I like it." What caused this perversity? Fear? Probably. For in my family, there had always been such awe of learned people. School was spoken of in reverent tones, the same tone in which one spoke of the synagogue. School, a teacher, a principal, they were hallowed concepts. They were important. Who knows, my little mind reasoned, what they might do if they found out you didn't like them? What might they do to your parents? So I said I liked it, and went back in the afternoon with shaking knees and dread in my heart, deeply depressed. I did not sleep that night, fearing the next morning. Should I go on?
Four.
Okay. Somehow, I could not tie my shoelaces quickly or adequately the next morning. A button popped off my skirt, necessitating a hurried repair and making my mother nervous. "Hurry, hurry, you'll be late," she admonished, and we were. The schoolyard was empty. Again, Mother headed for the 4 flights. At the top of the second, my stomach knotted and I balked. Again, "What's the matter?" urgently. I started to cry. "What's the matter? Why are you crying?" Mother asked in dismay. I couldn't formulate my fear. "What's the matter?" she repeated frantically. "Are you afraid of your teacher?" The fear of fear made me shake my head negatively. "Did someone hurt you?" I shook no again. "So what's the matter? Tell me, then I can help you." I could think of no reply. Then a stalling device came to me. "Carry me up. I'm tired. I can't walk so much." I spoke in comfortable Yiddish. "Carry you up? A big girl like you?" "I can't walk. I'm tired." She tried coaxing, dragging. I was adamant. In exasperation, aware of the passing of time, she finally picked me up in her arms, all 68 pounds of me, and carried me the remaining 2 flights. She was a broad-boned, heavy woman, but at the end of the ascent, she was flushed, sweating profusely, and out of breath. "Shame on you," she chided, gasping for air. "A big girl like you. Now go to class and be a good student." Another late entry and contemptuous look from Miss Brick. I avoided her boring eyes and stared at the bare desk in front of me, looking neither to the left nor right. Once she called on me, and the kid next to me nudged me to attention. She repeated her question, and I answered faintly in my jargon. Again, there was laughter and snickering from my classmates. Again, I felt miserable and alienated. She ignored me from that point on. The third day was like the second, late again for various sundry reasons. I needed more time in the bathroom. I ate slowly. My shoes came untied. I walked slowly. I found a dozen reasons to procrastinate. My mother had a worried look on her face, and her fears were justified. This time I insisted on the ground floor that she carry me all the way up to the 4th. The same routine of questions and denials and stubborn refusal to go up or into the classroom myself. Again, she staggered under my dead weight. I gave her no assistance, and she made it to the top and delivered me to room 404. My mother's sweat-drenched face was grim. Miss Brick was stern and menacing. My classmates smirked as I took my seat. No sooner did the door close behind my mother than I experienced a dreadful sense of desolation. I heard a shrill and piercing sound emanate from the innards of my soul, a sound I could not control, but which betrayed my fear, my alienation, my conflict. Miss Brick froze. 30-odd heads turned in my direction in disbelief and horror. My mother was halfway down the stairs when my inhuman shriek reached her ears. She rushed back to confirm her suspicions. Yes, it was I. "What's wrong?" she demanded of the petrified Miss Brick. "What's the matter?" she cried as she rushed to my seat. I burst into uncontrollable sobbing. Miss Brick recovered sufficiently to gasp with glaring finality, "Take that child out of here! I can't have her disturbing my class." "Where shall I take her?" my mother queried distraughtly. "Take her to the principal! Take her home! Take her out! I can't teach with her in the room." All the way to the principal's office, my mother begged, "What's the matter? Look at all the children. Nobody's hurting you. They're all behaving. Why can't you behave?" I was mute to all her wailings and recriminations. The only sounds I uttered were soul gasps and sobs. I could not explain my utter confusion and fear. When the principal heard the story, he suggested that I was not yet ready for school. Perhaps next year I would be more mature. Next year? But she'll lose a whole year. He shrugged helplessly. And what if she's not ready next year? My mother asked. He shrugged again, as if to say, that's your problem, lady. My mother was clearly in a quandary. Not only did she have the problem of my losing a year of schooling, but if I was not safely in school during the day, my parents' plan to work together in a small business would become complicated by my presence at home. Who would take care of me? Grandma had agreed to look after my little brother, but it was too much to expect of her to care for two young, active children. They would have to postpone their business venture. My mother's flushed and anxious face reflected the problems of recalcitrance my lack of cooperation had suddenly thrown upon her. As we crossed the street outside the school, her face suddenly assumed a shrewd expression, and there was a light of hope in her eyes. She pulled me into another official building, square and faced with large Baroque brown stones, the entrance framed by two round globes on each side. We entered a square hallway which led to a large, brightly lit room, at the end of which was a high desk, much like a judge's bench, behind which, seated magisterially, was a policeman. He looked questioningly at the respectably dressed, handsome but somewhat harried woman who was clutching the hand of the little girl with the tear-stained face. "What can I do for you, lady?" he inquired. How vividly I remember the bluff and rolling Irish brogue, the sharp eyes peering from the reddish-blonde, bushy eyebrows, the ruddy skin, the jowls, the hearty dignity of authority looking down on us from his perch. "Officer," started my mother, "my little girl doesn't want to go to school." And I saw her wink conspiratorially as I looked from one towering figure to the other. "What shall I do with her? Please, you tell her what happens to little children that don't go to school." My poor mother, desperation had driven her to the police station where she thought the law would aid and abet her. But to her chagrin, the police captain bellowed before she could get another word out. "You don't know what to do with her? Don't you know a police station is for criminals, not for little children? You don't know what to do with her," he glared. "I'll tell you what to do with her. Take her home and take the pants off her and give her a beating. That's what you do. But don't go bringing kids into no police station." Her would-be ally turned lecturer, my mother was humiliated. She backed out with me in tow as fast as she could, her color like the mercury in a thermometer. Back in the street, she turned all her fury on me, dragging me all the way home, punctuating each step with a, "See how you shamed me? On account of you, I made a fool out of myself. You rotten kid, you don't want to go to school. He could have arrested me, all on account of you. Wait till I get you home." I'm going to end there.
Oh yeah, you're gonna leave us in suspense.
But I will make it available.
That was an Irish accent?
A Yiddish Irish accent.
When did she write that, do you know?
No, I don't, in fact. I would imagine maybe around early 80s or so.
She has such a way of expressing character to show what someone is feeling or looking like.
Yeah. Yeah.
How many more pages?
That's half a dozen, probably, more pages.
What if some other readers?
Well, I'm thinking of you. So it's not me so much. If
Zeb's got great
I've been talking a lot already. Then.
yeah, Zeb's been teaching at the Organic Grower School today and yesterday, and he's probably tired of
However,
that.
when she said her name, she didn't say Gertrude. The name was
Gittel.
She said Gittler. That's her Yiddish Hebrew name, actually.
Oh, that's beautiful.
And that's what they called her at home, Gitla. Gertrude is the Anglicization. Yeah. Anglicization.
American.
Yeah, American.
Does Gitla have a
American.
Anglicization, I guess.
Does that have a meaning?
Gitla?
Well, the "la" means little on the end, but the "gittel."
I think little bird, maybe, or I don't know the answer to that. Yeah. I'm sure it does have a meaning, but yeah.
Was she born in New York or in Romania?
She was born in New York. She was second generation. My grandparents came over during a wave of immigration, I guess in the early first decade of the 20th century. Yeah.
So was that her immediate family where the other woman was there helping raise the kids, or was that her mother's family?
That woman that she was referring to was Tushika.
Right.
And Tushika was the woman who arranged my grandparents' marriage in Romania and held that over their head when she came to America. When she needed a place to live, she said, I need a place to live, I'm moving in with you, basically.
I brought you together, I'm coming.
And she ended up staying with them for the rest of her life, basically. And which was no end of trouble for my grandparents. I mean, she did not get along well with my grandmother.
Did she work on her?
Well, no, she
Midwifing, didn't she?
She was a midwife in Romania. I guess I'd have to reread the book, but she gallivanted a lot. She drank, and she smoked.
Did
and
she make
partied.
wine too? Like, did she make wine? Wasn't she a winemaker?
No, that was my grandfather.
Oh, that was good.
Made wine, yeah. But and as I understand it, that was not an uncommon situation. It was. Times were tough, for him. They couldn't find work. They couldn't speak English, so the work they could find was really limited. And sometimes families lived in very small, crowded quarters together. Yeah. And it was, when my parents eventually made enough money to move out of that area of the South Bronx and get a mortgage on a house in Queens, in Flushing, it was like finally they had fulfilled their parents' dreams of coming to America, the promised land, and living, having their own home, was just something they only dreams were made of.
Did your mom have siblings?
One brother.
Was he a writer also?
No, that's a whole other story. Yeah.
That generation is passing very quickly now. Her generation, the same generation as my father.
Yeah.
Are leaving the
They
planet.
are.
I think it's a real important lesson for all of us to share with our children what our histories are like. Because when I hear you, one of the things that came to my mind is, which school in the South Bronx? Because that's where I came from.
PS 63.
75. So.
Right. In the St. Mary's Park neighborhood.
Okay, so it was near where I lived as a child. But so many of the things that you speak about remind me of my childhood, where you were crowded into a small apartment, where you never turned a guest away. I remember my mother would have company all the time, and I remember at one point saying, how is it that people show up at the door? And she said, well, you never turn anybody away. She said, so you add a little water to the soup. That was her standard expression, that you never turned anybody away. And if somebody came, and we had 2 bedrooms, a small kitchen, and a living room, which always had somebody on the pull-out, pastoral convertible. And another set of people came to visit from Chicago or wherever else they came from. And you had no room. You put 2 chairs together, but you never turned anyone away. And I remember somebody saying, well, I can't have company because I don't have enough beds in my house. And I was thinking to myself, well, there's a floor, they're putting chairs together and so on. So many things have changed over the course of time. The open doors, the hospitality, the taking care, taking in a family.
It was a village. It was a shtetl, right? Which was what they called the old neighborhoods in Romania and Eastern Europe. And our entire extended family lived within a few blocks of where we lived. All the immigrants came over and lived together. And when I was born, that's what it was. I mean, I have vague memories of that. But in a few years, that all vanished and just they dispersed to the 4 corners of the globe, basically.
Opportunity is wonderful, but opportunity has drawbacks, because opportunity means you go to where the job is, you have an offer, you're pleased about the offer, but on the other hand, you then leave your history behind. And I remember at your mom's 90th birthday celebration, and I remember, when family members talked about her history and so forth, and I kept thinking, this is something to transfer to the younger generations, that they shouldn't struggle to find out what they're about and where they're from. And, it just brings memories back, but I think it is, as I started out by saying, a lesson to us, is to share those experiences.
And it's sad that sometimes it takes something like this for us to recognize that.
Yeah.
That we need to slow down and listen to our elders. I first met both your parents at our house when we were young and our children were very young, and your parents came to dinner. I remember your mom was so gracious. I have no idea what I cooked, but she was always so thankful and brought that up years later, and she was just such a beautiful person. So intelligent, so loving, so giving. Have nothing but very, very fond memories.
She always loved you too.
She's a really beautiful person.
Did she live in Washington, D.C.?
What?
Did she live in Washington, D.C.?
Did she live in Washington, D.C.? They never lived in Washington, D.C., but they got married in Washington, D.C.
I thought I remembered her
When my
talking
father
about
was
working in a school there in
well,
Washington.
no, my father was in the Army, and he was stationed there for a very short time.
Maybe she did have a short teaching job or something.
It's possible. She may have worked as a nurse. She did that as well at one time.
She's about teaching young people in high school.
I thought she mentioned Washington too.
Well, my sister lives in Silver Spring, Maryland, of course, and they did, like I said, they actually got married in Washington, D.C. They were stationed there for a very short time, I remember them telling me. They were stationed in Lawrence, Kansas at one time, when that's where my father learned the meat cutting trade. During World War II, that's correct.
What was he doing in Lawrence, Kansas, did you say?
Lawrence, Kansas. My father was stationed in the Army in Lawrence, Kansas. They had a training program for meat cutters. They probably had many other things too, but that was one of the things they had on one of the bases in Lawrence, Kansas.
When did your family live in Flushing?
Well, when I was about 5 years old, we moved from the Bronx to Flushing. That was in 1955. And they lived there until about 1981.
My mother's family, her mom and dad and her were from Flushing.
From Flushing?
From Flushing. And they also had a stationery store in Flushing.
Really?
During the 50s.
Ah.
Yeah. So I would
we'll have
imagine,
to talk about that.
I would imagine your mom might have come in there for writing supplies at one time. and you also mentioned Century Village.
Yeah.
Is that in Boca Raton?
West Palm Beach.
West Palm. Because there's another Century
There's
Village.
several, yeah.
Yeah.
So, and that was an interesting place in a lot of ways. In a lot of ways, it wasn't interesting at all. It was flat, it's suburban, and I didn't like going down there to visit her. But the community made it an interesting place because I think there were 20,000 people. Am I correct? And it was a huge complex, and a lot of the people that moved there were Jewish people from New York, and I remember my parents telling me that they reunited with people that they hadn't seen since their childhood in Century Village, and so there was this tremendous community of people that it became a cultural center, which was very interesting in a lot of ways. But I couldn't stand the bugs and the flatness of it, and the ticky-tacky apartment, condominiums and everything. But it's the people that make a place, really. And it was good for them in a lot of ways. They had a lot. They had a rich cultural scene.
She got to dance a lot there.
They did. You could do anything you wanted in Century Village. It was like a micro city,
About their social activism, the summer that Zeb was due to be born, 1981, there was an airline strike. And Gert and Max wanted to come out and see their, grandchild. They took a bus all the way cross country from New York to past Spokane just to be there at that time because they didn't want to cross the strike lines.
That's right.
Fortunately, I think it was over, or
they took a train back. They took a train back.
Right.
And that was really a difficult thing for my father to do. My father was a very big, kind of overweight man. I mean, he was always a very hustler. He played football in high school, and he worked very hard lifting things in his butcher shop. And he was overweight, but he was a solid man. But now he had retired at this point, and he had a lot of problems with his legs. It was very difficult for him to sit still. And for him to take a bus across country like that without the opportunity to walk around, it was just a tremendous sacrifice. I mean, but that's how strongly they believed in their principles. He would not cross the picket line of the airline.
Thank you for doing this.
Oh, thank you all for being here so much and sharing.
Sharing your mother's life, your family's life, your life, children's lives.
What a wonderful community I live in.
My father passed away in September, and he was 89. And he was born in America, and his parents came from Cuba in 1921. And they were the first Cuban Anglo family to live in this Jewish neighborhood in Brooklyn.
Where?
In Brooklyn.
Jewish neighborhood.
Or in the Bronx, excuse me. And that's where he was raised. And during the Sabbaths and the Shabbat, he was a Shabbat boy. And they would hire my father to turn the light switches on, or shovel the coal, or go run all these errands that weren't allowed to be done, and he would get his little pennies, and so he was raised in that culture before he was even raised in. He learned Yiddish and Spanish and Yiddish before he learned English, and that was. That was his upbringing, and that was sort of passed on to my generation too.
I think one of the things we don't see here in rural America is one, urban life, and two, ethnic neighborhoods.
Right, yeah.
And in the major cities that were impacted on by immigration, it was like you went to where you felt comfortable. And who were you comfortable with? People like yourself. And the other part of it was, since I grew up in the same area, was that in the cities, particularly during the period of immigration, there were jobs that tended to be ethnically oriented, like the cops. So when you describe the balls outside, those round globes, I remember at the police station not too far, we lived a little bit north of where you are, where you were living. But I remember, in my case, the 41st precinct and the Irish cops, and it seemed like every cop was Irish. And the Irish were them, and we were us. And it's important even now as we think about the Latinos who are here, they're undergoing the same experience, them and us. The children will integrate, but the parents had a really difficult time because they had to deal with different language, different culture, and in fact, it was often the children who could speak English as native speakers who would translate the culture to the parents. They would say, you don't say it that way. You don't do it that way. You know, and this is part of the wonderful thing, the complexity, but also the wonderful part of what America has been. You know, here we're more similar than different. But for my parents were Russian, and they had to, when they came to America, they immediately had to go to work. Learning the language, that was secondary. The first thing was make a living, support your family. And it took time to learn these other kinds of things, and the experiences of your mom and your dad were surviving in a place that you didn't fully understand. Yeah. And you had to get out there and do it, and raise a family, and do all these things, and you wanted to improve your life too. So that's a cool story. I want to see the end of that. Yeah.
It's so interesting, you know. You say, yeah, you lived a little bit north. My whole universe, I remember when I was that age, was just this several block region, and it just seemed like that was where we went shopping, as we went to school, you know. I looked recently at a Google map of the South Bronx, and it's such a small area. I mean, I thought of, for instance, Yankee Stadium as a universe away, you know, a world away. It was only 8 blocks away from where we lived, you know, and another thing I wanted to just mention, it's true, you know, most of the cops were Irish, and you know, and most of the school teachers were Irish also, but there was crossover. The melting pot was going on. One of my uncles, my father's brother, was a cop.
Oh, really?
Yeah, Uncle Patty. That's right. And
well, you know, there's an interesting story about Colin Powell, who lived in that neighborhood, not where you live, but further north in Hunts Point.
Yeah.
And when I read his autobiography, and as a kid, after school, he would work in a furniture store. And the furniture store was owned by some Jewish merchants, and many of the clients didn't speak English very well, and they spoke Yiddish. And the story, which is true, is that when he first went to Israel, he started to speak Yiddish to David Ben-Gurion. And they were flabbergasted. And here the secretary, well, I guess it wasn't Ben-Gurion, but one of the Israeli leaders, and he greeted him in Yiddish. And I remember when there were holidays, and when they were in those neighborhoods, when there were Jewish holidays, all the kids knew the holidays of every other group. And the schools were closed, and they knew when they were going to be closed. And that's the way you had to accommodate each other. You know, now it's different, but understanding different groups and their ways was very important. It's how you navigated your life, because there were Italians, there were Irish, there were Jewish. It was all over. And one of the complexities of urban living is that you have to know how the other group acts so that you don't insult them, because them's fighting words.
It's true. Yeah. Well, I thank you all again for being here, and please stay around and finish up the food. I really don't want to take any of it home. And the wine, drink the wine.